You are a podcaster. The word came out like a weapon sharp rehearsed, loaded with 35 years of congressional authority. Maxine Waters leaned forward in her chair, her finger jabbing toward the witness table, her voice filling the Rayburn House Office Building hearing room with the particular fury that had made her famous and feared on Capitol Hill for 3.5 decades. A podcaster who got a badge because he kissed Donald Trump's ring. You have no business sitting in that chair. You are not FBI. You have never been FB. You are a media personality playing dress-up in a government office. And every American watching this hearing should be terrified that the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the most powerful law enforcement agency in this nation, has a talk show host as its deputy director. The gallery stirred. Camera shutters fired in rapid succession. On the dais, Republican members of the Judiciary Committee exchanged the practiced look of politicians who know they're watching a viral moment being born. Democratic members nodded along with Waters, some openly. The hearing room hummed with the particular electricity that accompanies a Maxine Waters performance, because that's what it was, and everyone knew it, and she didn't care, because the performance was the point. Dan Bongino sat at the witness table. He did not flinch. He did not shift in his chair. He did not reach for his water glass, or adjust his microphone, or look to his counsel for guidance. He sat the way a cop sits when a suspect is screaming at him during an interrogation, still patient, cataloging every word for later use. He waited until she was finished. He let the silence settle for 2 full seconds, long enough for the cameras to register the contrast between her fury and his stillness. Then he opened a folder. "Congresswoman Waters," he said, and his voice was the flat, unhurried voice of Queens, New York, the voice of a man who had spent 4 years as an NPD officer and 12 years as a Secret Service agent, and had learned that the person who speaks quietest in a room full of shouting is the person everyone listens to. "I appreciate the passion. I'd like to read something into the record if the chairman permits." The chairman nodded. Federal Election Commission filing. Committee name, Citizens for Waters. Between 2003 and 2023, your campaign paid a total of $1,213,000 to a company called Progressive Connections. The payment category listed on every filing is Slate Mailer Management Fees. Progressive Connections is a fictitious business name registered to your daughter, Karen Waters. He looked up from the folder. $1.2 million from your donors to your daughter. Over 20 years for pamphlets. The hearing room changed. Not in the dramatic way of a courtroom on television, no gasps, no murmurs, no gavel. It changed the way a room changes when someone turns on a light in a dark corner and everyone sees what's been sitting there all along. A shift in attention. A realignment of focus. The cameras, which had been pointed at Waters during her tirade, swiveled to Bongino and stayed there. Waters opened her mouth. Nothing came out. It was the first time in 35 years of public life, 35 years of calling presidents racist, of demanding impeachments, of telling cabinet members they weren't welcome in restaurants, that Maxine Waters had nothing to say. The silence lasted 3 seconds. In politics, 3 seconds of silence from Maxine Waters is an event of geological significance. To understand how it happened, how the woman who had built an empire on righteous fury found herself muted by a man reading her own financial disclosures, you have to go back 4 hours. To the morning when Maxine Waters still believed she was the prosecutor and Dan Bongino was the defendant. She arrived at the Rayburn building at 7:45, which was early for her. Waters was not a morning person. She was a performance person, and performances require preparation, hair wardrobe, the selection of the right pair of glasses that says, "I am serious, but also fashionable." The review of talking points that she would not actually use, because Maxine Waters had never in her life needed talking points. She had instinct. She had volume. She had 35 years of never being challenged by anyone who mattered. Her chief of staff, a careful man named Tuan Samuel, had prepared a briefing packet. It contained Bongino's public statements, his podcast clips, his 3 failed congressional campaigns, and a summary of his appointment as FBI Deputy Director by Kash Patel. The packet was organized around a single theme: Bongino is a podcaster who has no business running the FBI. "Hit the credentials," Samuel said. "Hard, over and over. Podcaster. Talk show host. Not FBI. The media will run with it. By this afternoon, every chyron in the country will say, 'Waters confronts unqualified FBI Deputy Director.' That's the win." Waters flipped through the packet without reading it. She didn't need to. She'd been doing this since before Tuan Samuel was born. She knew how congressional hearings worked. You pick a line of attack. You deliver it with maximum volume. The cameras capture the moment, and the news cycle does the rest. The substance didn't matter. The clip mattered. "He's a podcaster," she said. End of story. What Waters didn't know, because she hadn't read the briefing packet closely enough, and because her staff hadn't researched Bongino's career beyond the podcast, and because 35 years of never being challenged had made her incurious about the people she attacked, was that Dan Bongino had been a police officer in one of the most violent neighborhoods in America before she'd ever heard his name. She didn't know about the 75th Precinct in East New York, Brooklyn. She didn't know about the Financial Fraud Task Force. She didn't know about the Department of Justice Award. She didn't know he'd protected Barack Obama. And she especially didn't know that a man who had spent years investigating financial fraud for the United States Secret Service, who had built cases against people who hide money in shell companies and route payments through family businesses, was the worst possible opponent for a congresswoman whose daughter had been collecting campaign money for 2 decades. 3 miles away, in a secure office at FBI headquarters on Pennsylvania Avenue, Bongino sat with his general counsel, a career DOJ attorney named Marcus Webb, and 2 analysts who had spent the previous week building what Bongino called, in the blunt language of a Queens cop, the receipt folder. "She's going to call you a podcaster," Webb said. "That's her only play. She doesn't know your background. Her staff thinks you're a TV personality who got a political appointment." "Good," Bongino said. "Let her. What's your plan when she goes after your credentials?" "Precinct 75, Financial Fraud Task Force, Presidential Protection Division, Obama. I lay it all out, flat, no drama, like I'm reading a resume at a job interview. The contrast does the work. She's screaming, 'I'm reading facts.'" And then Bongino opened a laptop. On the screen was a spreadsheet, 20 years of Federal Election Commission filings, organized chronologically. Citizens for Waters. Progressive Connections. Karen Waters. Dollar amounts highlighted in yellow. Each one verified against public FEC records. Then I read her the receipts. Webb studied the spreadsheet. 1.2 million over 20 years. "For pamphlets," Bongino said. "Slate mailers. She's the only federal politician in America who uses them. The only one. And the person running the operation is her daughter. Her donors, people in South Central Inglewood-Compton, some of the poorest zip codes in California, give her money to fight for them. And she sends it to her kid." He closed the laptop. "She's built a 35-year brand as the voice of the poor. I'm going to show that she's been using the poor as a business model. Not with opinions, not with insults, with FEC filings, public records, numbers that anyone with an internet connection can verify. Webb nodded slowly. She'll play the race card. She always does. And when she does, I'll remind her that I started my career in East New York, 98% minority, one of the poorest neighborhoods in the country, and that I protected Barack Obama with my life. Let her explain how a man who served a black neighborhood and guarded a black president is a racist. She'll say you're attacking a black woman who's fought for her community. And I'll say I'm reading FEC filings. That's it. FEC filings. If reading public records is an attack, then the Federal Election Commission is the real enemy. He paused. Then, in the voice of a cop who has seen too much to be surprised by anything, but who still, despite everything, gets angry at the people who prey on the vulnerable, she lives in Hancock Park. $5 million house. 6,000 square feet. Her district has a 27% poverty rate. She doesn't even live in the district. She lives in a mansion next to the old J. Paul Getty estate. And she calls herself a warrior for the poor. I walked a beat in East New York. I lived near the people I served. I know what poverty looks like because I saw it every morning and every night. Not from a mansion in Hancock Park. From the street, he stood up and paced the restless movement of a man who spent years on his feet on a beat in a formation. Not a desk politician. A street cop who happened to end up behind a desk. Here's what people don't understand about financial fraud. When a CEO steals from a pension fund, when a banker fabricates loan documents, the victims are always the same people, the people who can least afford to lose. Working people, retirees, small investors, the poor. The fraud doesn't happen in mansions. It lands in neighborhoods like East New York, in districts like the 43rd. And when I look at Waters' record, not her speeches, not her Twitter posts, her actual financial record, I see a pattern I've seen 100 times as a financial fraud investigator. Money comes in from small donors who believe in a cause. Money goes out to family members through entities that provide questionable value. The operation is technically legal, and the people who funded it never know where their money went. That's not corruption in the criminal sense. I'm not saying she committed a crime. I'm saying it's a betrayal, and the people she betrayed are the ones she claims to fight for. Webb looked at the file one more time. What about the SBF angle? Bongino pulled up a screenshot Waters tweet from December 2, 2022. We appreciate that you've been candid. Below it, a photograph of Waters and Sam Bankman-Fried at a conference in the Bahamas, arms around each other, both smiling broadly. She was the chair of the House Financial Services Committee, the committee with oversight over crypto exchanges. SBF and his executives gave $300,000 to 9 members of her committee. He gave $40 million to Democrats. And when his platform collapsed and $8 billion disappeared, she thanked him for being honest. 7 months later, convicted on 7 federal counts, 25 years. She was supposed to be the watchdog. She was the lapdog. The hearing began at 10. Chairman Jim Jordan gavelled the room to order and read the standard opening. The committee would hear testimony from FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino regarding ongoing reforms at the Bureau under Director Kash Patel. The first 90 minutes were routine. Republican members asked about the pipe bomb investigation, the restructuring of field offices, and the new emphasis on violent crime. Democratic members asked about political targeting, the departure of career agents, and the demand for names of agents involved in January 6 investigations. Bongino answered each question in the same flat, precise tone, the tone of a man giving a briefing, not performing for cameras. Then Chairman Jordan recognized Maxine Waters for 5 minutes. Waters was not a member of the Judiciary Committee, but Jordan had agreed with the particular generosity of a chairman who knows the opposition is about to make a mistake, to allow her to question the witness as a courtesy. Waters adjusted her glasses. She did not look at notes. She did not need to. "Mr. Bongino," she began, and the "Mr." was deliberate, a refusal to use his title, a small act of disrespect designed to establish the power dynamic from the first syllable. "You are not an FBI agent. You have never been an FBI agent. The position of Deputy Director has been held by career FBI agents for 117 years. You broke that tradition, not because you earned it, not because you had the qualifications, because you were a loyal supporter of Donald Trump on your podcast, and he rewarded you. Is that an accurate summary of how you got this job?" Bongino leaned toward his microphone. "No, Congresswoman, it's not. Would you like me to tell you how I actually got here? I didn't ask for your life story. I asked, I'll keep it brief." He didn't wait for permission. In 1995, I was 19 years old. I entered the NYPD Police Cadet Program at the City University of New York. In 1997, I became a full-time police officer. I was assigned to the 75th Precinct in East New York, Brooklyn. He paused. Not for drama, Bongino didn't do drama. For emphasis. For those who don't know the 75th Precinct, it covered one of the highest crime neighborhoods in the United States. In the late 90s, East New York had a murder rate that made the national news. I patrolled those streets. I responded to domestic violence calls at 2 in the morning. I knew the families. I knew the kids. I knew who was selling and who was buying and who was getting hurt. In 1999, I joined the United States Secret Service as a special agent. I was assigned to the New York field office and then to the Financial Fraud Task Force, where I investigated white-collar criminals, people who steal money through sophisticated schemes, and route it through shell companies and family businesses. I received a Department of Justice Award for the successful investigation and prosecution of financial fraud. He turned a page in his folder, though he wasn't reading from it. He was letting the camera see the gesture. In 2006, I joined the Presidential Protective Division. I was assigned to protect the President of the United States. I served on the detail for President George W. Bush. And then I stayed on and served on the detail for President Barack Obama. 2 presidents, 2 parties. Both trusted me with their lives. After that, I transferred to the Baltimore field office, where I served as the lead agent on a multi-million-dollar fraud investigation that resulted in successful federal prosecutions. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree from the City University of New York and a master's degree from Penn State University. I've been in law enforcement for 13 years. He looked directly at Waters. So, with respect, Congresswoman, I'm not a podcaster who got a badge. I'm a law enforcement officer who had a podcast. I gave up a show that reached 20 million people a month to take a government salary. What podcaster does that? The hearing room recalibrated. Waters' staff, watching from a row behind the dais, sensed the shift, the almost imperceptible change in the room's attention that occurs when a witness stops being a target and starts being a threat. Samuel texted Waters' press secretary. He came prepared. She needs to pivot. Waters didn't pivot. She had spent 35 years not pivoting. Pivoting was for politicians who were afraid. Maxine Waters was not afraid. Mr. Bongino, your resume doesn't change the fact that you and Kash Patel are weaponizing the FBI for Donald Trump's personal Congresswoman. Since you've raised the subject of weaponizing public trust for personal benefit, I'd like to enter something into the record. The phrase public trust for personal benefit landed like a door opening onto a room Waters didn't want anyone to see. She heard it. The gallery heard it. The cameras heard it. Bongino opened his folder. Federal Election Commission filings, Committee Citizens for Waters, Payee Progressive Connections, a company registered to your daughter, Karen Waters. Payments, Slate Mailer Management Fees. Total between 2003 and 2023, $1,213,000. He read the numbers the way a cop reads a booking sheet, flat clinical, letting the facts do the work. In the 2020 election cycle alone, your campaign paid your daughter $250,000. In the 2022 cycle, $192,300. In 2021, not even an election year, $74,000. Congresswoman slate mailing is an uncommon practice in federal elections. In fact, during the 2020 general election, you were reportedly the only federal politician in the entire United States running a slate mailer operation. The only one. And the person managing it was your daughter. He set down the folder. Your campaign donors, many of them from one of the poorest congressional districts in California, gave you money to fight for them. Your campaign gave over $1 million of that money to your daughter for pamphlets. Now, I wouldn't normally bring this up in a hearing about FBI operations, but you've accused me of abusing public trust. So let me ask, when Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, not a Republican organization, not a conservative think tank, a liberal watchdog group, named you one of the most corrupt members of Congress 4 times in 2005, 2006, 2009, and 2011, was that weaponization too. Waters' hand hit the desk. This is a distraction. This is an attack on a black woman who has fought for her community for 35 years. You come in here with your Congresswoman. I'm not attacking anyone. I'm reading FEC filings. These are public records. Anyone in this room can look them up on the Federal Election Commission's website tonight. Your donors gave you money. Your campaign gave $1.2 million of that money to your daughter. Those are facts. If you'd like to explain why your daughter was the only person in America running a slate mailer operation for a federal campaign, I'm genuinely interested in the answer. Waters did not provide the answer. She stared at Bongino with the look of a woman who has been in 1,000 fights, but has never in any of them been hit with her own financial disclosures. Bongino continued. The tone didn't change. It never changed. That was the weapon, the monotone, the flatness, the cop voice that treats $1 million revelation the same way it treats a parking ticket. No theatrics, no raised voice, just receipts. And since we're discussing the relationship between your public service and your family's finances, Congresswoman, let me add one more item. In September 2008, you arranged a meeting between Treasury Department officials and executives of One United Bank. Your husband, Sidney Williams, was a former member of the bank's board of directors and a stockholder. The bank had invested heavily in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and was on the verge of collapse. One United received $12 million in TARP bailout funds, $12 million in taxpayer money. And if the bank had not received that money, I'm quoting the Ethics Committee's own report, your husband's investment would have been worthless. The House Ethics Committee charged you with 3 violations of the Code of Official Conduct. 3. You told the committee you had recused yourself, but your Chief of Staff, Mikhail Moore, your grandson, continued to advocate for One United on your behalf. The committee cleared you. Your grandson received a letter of reproval instead. He paused. Just long enough. Congresswoman, I investigated financial fraud for the United States Secret Service. I built cases against people who use intermediaries to avoid accountability. The pattern is always the same. The principal claims they didn't know. The subordinate takes the blame. And the money stays in the family. I'm not questioning the committee's decision. I'm inviting the American people to draw their own conclusions. Waters erupted. I was cleared unanimously, 10-0. The committee found I did nothing wrong. You were cleared because your grandson said he acted without your knowledge, while working in your office, under your supervision. For a bank your husband owned stock in, and the grandson was the one who received the reproval. Not you. You walked away clean, and the 24-year-old staffer who happened to be your grandson took the hit. That's not justice, Congresswoman. That's a family business. The phrase hung in the air. Family business. It connected the dots, the daughter collecting $1.2 million in campaign money, the husband's bank getting $12 million in bailout funds, the grandson absorbing the ethics violation. 3 family members, 3 revenue streams, all flowing through the same elected official. Bongino shifted, slightly, the way a boxer shifts his weight before the combination that ends the fight. Congresswoman, you've built your career as a voice for the poor. Your district, California's 43rd, includes parts of South Central Los Angeles, Inglewood, Gardena, Compton. The poverty rate in parts of your district is 27%, double the national average. These are communities where families live on $30,000 a year, where kids go to schools that haven't been renovated since the 90s, where the streets your constituents walk every day look nothing like the street you live on, because you don't live in your district. You live in Hancock Park, a 6,000-square-foot mansion valued at nearly $5 million. Your neighbors include the former estate of oil magnate J. Paul Getty. Your home sits outside the boundaries of the 43rd Congressional District. I started my career in East New York, Brooklyn, Precinct 75. The people there lived in walk-ups and housing projects. I didn't commute in from a mansion to police their neighborhood. I was there, every shift, every call. I saw poverty the way your constituents see it up close every day, with no gate between me and it. Seat. So, when you call yourself a warrior for the poor Congresswoman, when you've collected $1.2 million for your daughter from your campaign, when your husband's bank got $12 million in taxpayer bailout money, when you live in a mansion outside the district, you claim to represent the people in South Central and Inglewood. And Compton might reasonably ask, who exactly are you fighting for? And Congresswoman, since we're discussing South Central, in 1992, when the Rodney King verdict came down, your district erupted. 63 people died. Over 2,000 were injured. 12,000 were arrested. Reginald Denny was pulled from his truck and beaten nearly to death with a cinder block on a street in the district you represent. You led a chant of no justice, no peace. You called it a rebellion, not a riot. You said it was understandable. That was 33 years ago. The poverty rate in your district hasn't meaningfully changed since then. South Central still bears the scars. And somewhere between 1992 and today, you moved to a $5 million mansion in Hancock Park, a few miles, and an entire world away from the people whose rebellion you championed. Waters had been building toward an explosion for 3 minutes. It arrived now. This man, this administration, is destroying democracy. They are locking up journalists. They are weaponizing every agency in this government. They are targeting black leaders. And you sit there in a chair that doesn't belong to you, reading opposition research about my family while this country burns. Bongino waited. He had learned in the NYPD that when someone is shouting, the worst thing you can do is shout back. You wait. You let the shouting echo off the walls. and then you speak quietly, because quiet after shouting is the loudest sound in the world. Congresswoman, you've raised the subject of threats to democracy. I'd like to discuss your own record on that topic. He opened to a tabbed section of his folder. June 23, 2018. Los Angeles. You made the following statement, and I'm quoting from video: "If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them, and you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere." Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, a Democrat congresswoman, not a Republican, responded the following day. Quote, "No one should call for the harassment of political opponents. That's not right. That's not American. Your own party's leader in the Senate said, what you did was un-American. Not my words. His." He turned a page. April 17, 2021. Brooklyn Center, Minnesota. The Derek Chauvin trial was days from verdict. Tensions were at a breaking point. George Floyd's family was waiting for justice. And you traveled to Minnesota and told a crowd of protesters, quote, "We've got to stay on the street, and we've got to get more confrontational. We've got to make sure that they know that we mean business." The judge presiding over the Chauvin trial, Judge Peter Cahill, made the following statement from the bench: "I wish elected officials would stop talking about this case, especially in a manner that is disrespectful to the rule of law and to the judicial branch." He called the behavior by elected officials abhorrent, and he told the defense, and I quote, "Congresswoman Waters may have given you something on appeal that may result in this whole trial being overturned." Bongino set down the folder. George Floyd's family wanted justice. A jury was deliberating, and a sitting member of Congress flew to Minnesota and told a crowd to get more confrontational, a statement so inflammatory that the presiding judge said it could have resulted in the entire trial being thrown out. Not because you cared about justice, because you wanted a camera moment. The Republican minority moved to censure you. Democrats voted it down 216 to 210, along party lines. Not because your comments were acceptable, even the judge called them abhorrent, but because your party couldn't afford the political cost. Waters was breathing hard. Her hands were flat on the desk. Her staff, watching from behind the dais, had stopped texting. Bongino spoke one more time. The voice hadn't changed, hadn't risen, hadn't wavered. "And one more thing, Congresswoman. Since you've spent this hearing lecturing me about corruption and abuse of power. In November 2022, Sam Bankman-Fried presided over the collapse of FTX. $8 billion in customer funds vanished. Pensioners, small investors, working families, people who trusted a platform that FTX's celebrity endorsements told them was safe, gone. You were the chair of the House Financial Services Committee, the committee with direct oversight over exactly this kind of fraud. And here is what you said on Twitter on December 2, 2022, 3 weeks after $8 billion disappeared. "We appreciate that you've been candid in your discussions about what happened at FTX." Candid? The man who stole $8 billion was candid. You thanked him. Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX executives donated over $40 million to Democratic candidates and groups during the 2022 cycle. $300,000 went directly to 9 members of the House Financial Services Committee, your committee. There are photographs of you and Bankman-Fried at an FTX conference in the Bahamas. Arms around each other. Smiling. 7 months after you called him candid, he was convicted on 7 federal charges, including wire fraud conspiracy and money laundering. He's serving 25 years in federal prison. You called a man who stole $8 billion candid. And then you came to this hearing and called me a threat to justice. Congresswoman, I investigated financial criminals for the United States Secret Service. I know what fraud looks like. I know how it operates. I know the pattern, the scheme, the cover, the enablers who look the other way because the money is flowing in the right direction. And I know what it looks like when the people who are supposed to hold criminals accountable are too compromised to do their jobs. The hearing room was still. The kind of still that happens when a large number of people simultaneously realize they are witnessing something that will be discussed for a long time. Chairman Jordan sat with his hands folded, making no move to intervene. Democratic members stared at various points on the wall or the ceiling, the gaze of politicians who are calculating the distance between themselves and the blast radius. Bongino looked at Waters one last time. Let me summarize the record, Congresswoman, since you asked about my qualifications to sit in this chair. Between 2003 and 2023, your campaign paid your daughter $1.2 million for pamphlets. Your husband's bank received $12 million in taxpayer bailout funds after you arranged a meeting with Treasury. You were charged with 3 ethics violations. Your grandson took the reproval. A liberal watchdog group named you one of the most corrupt members of Congress 4 separate times. You live in a $5 million mansion outside the district. You represent a district where the poverty rate is 27%. You told Americans to harass cabinet members in restaurants. Your own party leader called it un-American. You told protesters to get more confrontational during a murder trial. The judge called your behavior abhorrent and said you nearly caused a mistrial. And you called a man who stole $8 billion candid 3 weeks after the money disappeared and 7 months before he was convicted on 7 counts of federal fraud. I started my career walking a beat in East New York, Brooklyn, Precinct 75. The people there didn't live in mansions. They didn't have daughters collecting million-dollar campaign contracts. They didn't get bailouts when their investments went bad. They were the people you claim to represent from a $5 million house in Hancock Park. You've spent 35 years building a brand as a champion of the poor. But the poor in your district are still poor. The poverty rate is still 27%. The schools are still failing. The streets are still dangerous. And the only people who have gotten rich from Maxine Waters' career in public service are Maxine Waters and her family. I don't need to be lectured about justice by someone who thanked a man who stole $8 billion. I don't need to be lectured about qualifications by someone whose greatest financial achievement is funneling $1 million to her daughter for pamphlets. And I don't need to be lectured about democracy by someone whose own party leader said her rhetoric was not American. I protected 2 presidents. I investigated financial fraud. I walked the beat in one of the poorest neighborhoods in this country. I know what service looks like. And what you've done for 35 years, Congresswoman, isn't service. It's a business. Silence. Chairman Jordan let it hold for 4 seconds. Then, the gentlewoman's time has expired. Waters was already standing. How dare you? I have fought for 35 years. The gavel came down. The gentlewoman's time has expired. She stood at the dais for another moment, her hand gripping the edge of the desk, her mouth open around a sentence that wouldn't come. Then she gathered her papers, though she hadn't looked at them once, and walked out of the hearing room. Her staff followed. She did not stop for reporters. She did not stop for cameras. She turned left down the hallway and disappeared into the marble corridor. For 8 minutes, no member of the Congressional Black Caucus posted anything on social media. In an institution where political communication is measured in seconds, 8 minutes of silence is an event without precedent. The clip traveled the way all congressional hearing clips travel in the modern age, not as a single piece of footage, but as a series of fragments, each one optimized for a different audience and a different platform. The first fragment was the FEC filing reading. 37 seconds, Bongino's flat voice reading the numbers $1,213,000 Progressive Connections Karen Waters pamphlets. It hit 15 million views by dinner time. Someone on X overlaid the numbers on a split screen with images of South Central Los Angeles boarded storefronts, potholed streets, a homeless encampment 3 blocks from a school. The split screen went viral independently of the original clip. The second fragment was the credentials reversal. 24 seconds. I walked a beat in East New York, Precinct 75. The people there didn't live in mansions. Someone found Bongino's old NYPD precinct photo from 1998, a kid in a blue uniform with a crew cut standing outside the 75th Precinct Station House on Sutter Avenue. The photo was shared alongside a satellite image of Waters' Hancock Park mansion. No commentary needed. The third was the SBF moment. 19 seconds. You called a man who stole $8 billion candid. Someone dug up Waters' original tweet and placed it next to Bankman Fried's mugshot and his 25-year sentence. The juxtaposition was devastating. Candid became a hashtag. The fourth, the one that did the most damage, was the closing. The full summary. Every item in sequence. Daughter, $1.2 million. Husband's bank, $12 million. Ethics violations 3. Crew most corrupt 4 times. Mansion $5 million outside the district. Get more confrontational, judge said abhorrent. SBF candid, then convicted. 2 minutes and 14 seconds. It was shared 41 million times in 48 hours. Waters held a press conference 3 hours after the hearing. She stood in the Rayburn Building hallway, flanked by 5 members of the Congressional Black Caucus, and delivered a statement that had been revised 4 times in the interim. What you witnessed today, she said, was a racist attack on a black woman who has spent 35 years fighting for her community. Dan Bongino is a political operative installed by Donald Trump to weaponize the FBI against black leaders and progressive voices. His performance today was not oversight. It was character assassination. And I will not be silenced. The statement was factually precise in the way that political statements often are. When the underlying facts are indefensible, it addressed the characterization of the attack without addressing the content. Waters called it racist. She called it weaponized. She called it character assassination. But she didn't address the $1.2 million. She didn't address One United. She didn't address the mansion. She didn't address Candid. And by the time the press conference aired, 30 million people had already watched Bongino read the FEC filings, which meant that 30 million people noticed what she didn't say. The racist attack narrative encountered an immediate structural problem. Bongino had started his career in East New York, a neighborhood that was 98% black and Hispanic, and had protected Barack Obama. He hadn't mentioned race once during the hearing. He had mentioned FEC filings, Ethics Committee reports, Judge Cahill's statements, and Chuck Schumer's quote. Every source he cited was either a government document or a Democrat. The race card, which had protected Waters for 35 years, didn't work against a man who had served a black neighborhood, guarded a black president, and quoted a Democratic Senate leader. The most unexpected reaction came from Waters' own constituents. Not from political operatives or media figures, but from the people who lived in the 43rd Congressional District, the people whose donations had funded the payments to Karen Waters. A woman who ran a laundromat in Inglewood posted a video that was viewed 9 million times. She was standing in her shop still wearing her work apron, and she spoke directly to the camera. I've donated to Maxine Waters 3 times. $50 each time. I thought it was going to help the community. Literacy programs, job training, something. You're telling me my $50 went to her daughter for pamphlets. $1.2 million for pamphlets. I press shirts for $8 an hour. Do you know how many shirts, that is, a retired teacher from Compton wrote a letter to the Los Angeles Times that was published 3 days later? I've lived in this district for 41 years. The poverty rate when Maxine Waters took office was high. It's still high. The schools were struggling then. They're struggling now. She's been our representative for 35 years, and the only thing that's changed is the value of her house, which isn't even in our district. I'm not angry at the FBI, man. I'm angry at myself for not asking these questions sooner. Setu, a pastor from South Central, a man who had endorsed Waters in every election since 1996, gave an interview to a local news station and said something that was shorter and more devastating than anything said in the hearing room. $1.2 million is 24,000 textbooks. It's 600 scholarships for kids in our community. It went to pamphlets. For her daughter. I need to pray on that. The math became its own viral moment. 24,000 textbooks. 600 scholarships. 1,200 laptops. That's what $1.2 million buys in a community with a 27% poverty rate. The contrast between the number and the purpose pamphlets versus textbooks. Karen Waters versus the children of the 43rd District was the kind of simple arithmetic that no amount of political spin could obscure. Crew, the liberal watchdog group that had named Waters one of the most corrupt members of Congress 4 times, issued a statement confirming their prior reports. Our findings from 2005 through 2011 regarding Representative Waters' financial relationships with family members through campaign and official activities remain part of the public record. The pattern documented in those reports is consistent with the FEC filings cited during today's hearing. The FTX Candid clip became a case study in a different kind of failure. Waters had called Bankman-Fried candid on December 2, 2022, 3 weeks after $8 billion in customer funds disappeared. She had done so publicly on Twitter as the chair of the committee responsible for financial oversight. When someone assembled a timeline, November 11th, FTX collapse, 8 billion gone. December 2nd, Waters calls SBF candid. December 12th, SBF arrested in Bahamas. March 2024, SBF convicted on 7 counts. November 2024, SBF sentenced to 25 years. The timeline told a story that required no commentary. The person responsible for oversight thanked the person responsible for the crime. The deeper damage wasn't about any single dollar amount or any single statement. It was about the gap between the brand and the record. For 35 years, Maxine Waters had occupied a specific space in American politics, the fearless black congresswoman who speaks truth to power, who calls out racism, who fights for the poor, who demands accountability from the powerful. Auntie Maxine. The icon. The warrior. But icons survive on mythology, and mythology survives on the absence of scrutiny. What Bongino had done with FEC filings, not opinions, with government reports, not accusations, with the words of a Democratic Senate leader and a presiding judge, not partisan talking points, was subject, the mythology, to arithmetic. And the arithmetic didn't work. A warrior for the poor, whose daughter collected $1.2 million from her campaign. A champion of accountability, whose grandson absorbed her ethics violation. A voice of justice, who thanked a man who stole $8 billion. A representative of the people who lives in a $5 million mansion outside the district she represents. A critic of incitement who told crowds to get more confrontational, earning a rebuke from a judge who called her behavior abhorrent. a defender of norms whose own party leader called her rhetoric not American. Bongino didn't call her a criminal. He didn't call her corrupt. He didn't call her a racist, which would have been absurd, and he knew it. He called her something more precise and more damaging, something that connected all the dots: the daughter, the husband, the grandson, the mansion, the donors, the poverty rate into a single devastating image. He called her a poverty pimp. Not in those words. He was too disciplined for that. But the picture he painted a woman who built a career on the suffering of the poor, while her family extracted millions from the system her career was supposed to reform, was the picture that word describes. And once the picture was assembled, once the FEC filings and the Ethics Committee reports, and the property records and the judge's rebuke and the SBF timeline were laid out in sequence, the picture couldn't be unassembled. Bongino returned to FBI headquarters after the hearing. He didn't hold a press conference. He didn't post on social media. He went back to work. There were cases to review, operations to coordinate, the day-to-day business of being the second highest-ranking official in the most powerful law enforcement agency in the country business that doesn't trend on social media because it's the kind of boring, essential, unglamorous work that doesn't generate clips. When Webb asked him how he thought it went, Bongino said, "I read receipts. That's it. I didn't write the FEC filings. I didn't write the Ethics Committee report. I didn't write Judge Cahill's statement. She wrote her own record over 35 years. I just read it back to her, in front of 40 million people. The people in her district deserve to hear it. They've been paying for it." In the weeks that followed, Waters did what she had always done. She gave interviews. She posted on social media. She called the hearing a racist ambush and compared it to the attacks on every black leader who dares to speak truth. The machine still worked. The donations still came. The base still rallied. MSNBC still booked her. CNN still quoted her. But something had shifted. The same kind of shift that follows all of these moments, not a collapse, but a crack. Not an earthquake, but a settling of the foundation that changes how the structure bears weight. The crack was in the pause. The moment of hesitation when a donor considers writing a check and remembers the $1.2 million. The moment when an ally considers a joint press conference and remembers candid. The moment when a constituent hears, "I'm fighting for you," and thinks your daughter got $1 million and my kid's school doesn't have air conditioning. She walked into the hearing room as Auntie Maxine, the icon, the warrior, the voice of the voiceless. She walked out as a line item. In her own financial disclosures, read aloud by a cop from East New York who had learned in the streets and in the Secret Service and in the FBI that the most powerful weapon in law enforcement isn't a badge or a gun or a shouted accusation. It's a receipt. And in the 43rd Congressional District of California, in the laundromats and the barber shops and the schools without air conditioning and the streets that still haven't been repaved since the rebellion of 1992, people who had never thought to look up FEC filings were now looking. They were typing "Citizens for Waters" into the Federal Election Commission website. They were finding the payments: Progressive Connections, Karen Waters, Slate Mailer management fees, $8,000 here, $16,000 there, $250,000 in a single cycle. They did the math. They compared it to what they donated. $50, $100. Money they'd given because they believed it would help their community. Money that had ended up dollar by documented dollar in the bank account of their representative's daughter. Bongino had said it plainly, "I'm not attacking anyone. I'm reading FEC filings." But FEC filings, it turned out, were the most devastating attack of all. Because they couldn't be denied. They couldn't be spun. They couldn't be called racist or partisan or weaponized. They were numbers filed by Waters' own campaign, available to anyone with an internet connection. And the numbers told a story that 35 years of speeches and slogans and righteous fury couldn't rewrite. The story of a woman who spoke for the poor and spent for the family, the people's money, the family's business, and a cop from East New York who read the difference out loud.